The night was cold, and the wind outside howled as if it wanted to tear through the little town. The streets were nearly empty, and most shops had already closed. Only a small diner at the corner of the street still had its lights on. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and warm soup, the kind of smell that made people feel safe. The owner stood behind the counter, wiping the same spot over and over with a cloth. He wasn't really cleaning. He was lost in thought, worried about how slow business had been. There were days when barely 3 or 4 customers walked in, and he often wondered how much longer he could keep the doors open. The bills stacked on his desk at home were a constant reminder that times were tough. He looked around the diner. The red booths were empty. The clock ticked loudly, and the old jukebox in the corner was silent. He sighed and decided he might as well close early. Just as he reached for the switch to turn off the glowing sign outside, the bell above the door rang softly. He turned his head, and what he saw made him pause. A woman stood at the entrance, holding the hand of a little girl. Their coats were thin and worn, and both of them looked tired from walking in the freezing weather. The mother's eyes searched the room nervously, as though unsure if they should even be there. The little girl pressed closer to her, her cheeks red from the cold, and her small hands trembling. The owner could tell right away they had no money to spare. He had seen that look before, people who wanted warmth, but didn't know if they could afford it. For a moment, his own worries about money rose again. His diner was barely surviving, and he couldn't really afford to give food away. But then he looked at the little girl. She looked hungry, her eyes fixed on the counter where a pie sat under a glass dome. Something inside his heart softened. "Come in, sit down," he said gently, waving toward a booth near the window. The woman hesitated. We just needed to warm up for a few minutes," she whispered, almost apologetic. He nodded and gave a small smile. "You can sit as long as you need. Don't worry." They sat down, the little girl still holding tightly to her mother's hand. The owner walked back into the kitchen, his steps slow at first, then steady. He pulled out a pot of soup he had made earlier and poured 2 generous bowls. He cut 2 thick slices of bread and placed them on the side. Without saying much, he carried the tray over and set it in front of them. The little girl's eyes widened, and for the first time since they walked in, she smiled. "Is this for us?" she asked in a small voice. He nodded. "Yes, it's for you. Eat before it gets cold." The mother's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "Sir, we don't have." He shook his head before she could finish. "It's all right. Just eat. No one should be hungry on a night like this." The mother lowered her head in gratitude, and the little girl wasted no time picking up the spoon. She blew on the hot soup before taking a sip, and her face lit up with joy. The owner stood for a moment, watching quietly, then went back behind the counter, pretending to busy himself with paperwork. In truth, he was listening to the sound of their spoons against the bowls, the kind of sound that somehow made the diner feel alive again. As the mother ate slowly, she finally whispered, "Thank you. You don't know how much this means." The owner only smiled and said, "Don't mention it." The diner stayed quiet, but the warmth in the air felt different now. The owner's heart felt lighter. He thought about how strange life could be. He had been drowning in worry about his own struggles. Yet somehow, helping someone else eased that weight. The little girl finished her soup and leaned back, looking more relaxed. She noticed a napkin and a pen near the counter. With the innocent energy only a child has, she got up, walked over shyly, and asked, "Can I draw?" The owner nodded and handed her the pen. She bent over the napkin and began to doodle, her tongue sticking out in concentration. A few minutes later, she handed the napkin back to him. It was a simple drawing of the diner, with a big glowing sign and 3 smiling stick figures inside: the owner, the mother, and herself. "It's us," she said proudly. He looked at the napkin for a long time, touched more than he could explain. He carefully folded it and slipped it into his pocket. "Thank you," he told her softly. The girl grinned, and the mother smiled weakly, though her eyes still carried the weight of exhaustion. Later, as the night grew colder, the mother stood up, ready to leave. "We shouldn't take more of your time," she said quietly. The owner shook his head. "You can stay as long as you like." But she insisted, and they bundled up again, preparing to face the cold outside. Before leaving, she placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "We won't forget this." The bell above the door rang again as they stepped out into the snowy night. The owner stood there for a while, staring at the empty booth they had left behind. The bowls and spoons still sat on the table, and for some reason, the diner didn't feel as lonely anymore. He walked over, cleared the dishes, and sat down at the booth himself. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel the crushing weight of his own troubles. Instead, he thought about the little girl's drawing folded in his pocket. A reminder that even the smallest act of kindness could mean everything to someone. What he didn't know was that this small decision, made on a quiet snowy night, was about to set into motion changes that would affect not just their lives, but his as well. The next morning, the diner opened as usual. The owner came in early, just as he always did, brewing fresh coffee and arranging the chairs. The night before still lingered in his mind. He kept thinking about the mother and daughter who had walked in from the cold. He thought about the way the little girl's eyes had lit up when she tasted the soup, and the napkin drawing she had given him. He had tucked that napkin into his wallet before going to bed, as if it was a treasure. The sun hadn't fully risen, and only a few regular customers trickled in for their morning coffee. The owner kept glancing at the door, half expecting the mother and daughter to walk in again. Part of him hoped they would. Not because he thought they could pay, but because he wanted to know if they were safe. Just before noon, the door finally opened, and there they were. The mother looked a little less weary this time, though her coat was still thin against the sharp air. The little girl tugged her along eagerly, her eyes bright when she spotted the counter. The owner smiled to himself and waved them over. "Good to see you again," he said warmly. The mother lowered her head, clearly embarrassed. "We don't want to be a burden," she whispered. He shook his head. "You're not a burden. Sit. You must be hungry." They hesitated for a moment, then sat in the same booth as last night. The owner brought over 2 plates of pancakes and a jug of syrup. The little girl's face lit up, and she clapped her hands softly. The mother tried to protest again, but he only said, "Let her eat. That's all that matters." As they ate, the mother slowly opened up. Between quiet bites, she explained how they had ended up in this situation. She had been working at a small store until it closed down. With no job, no savings, and rent overdue, she and her daughter had lost their apartment. They had been moving from shelter to shelter, sometimes even sleeping in bus stations. The little girl had been missing school because they had no permanent place to stay. The owner listened carefully, his chest tightening with every word. He had his own struggles. His diner barely made enough to cover costs, but he couldn't imagine the weight she carried. He looked at the little girl, happily eating pancakes, unaware of how harsh the world could be, and he knew he couldn't let them keep suffering alone. "You've been through a lot," he said quietly. The mother nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I just want to give her a chance," she whispered. "I don't care about myself. I just want her to have a future." The owner felt a lump in his throat. For a moment, the diner was silent except for the sound of the little girl humming a tune as she ate. It was such a simple scene, yet it carried so much meaning. Later, as the mother and daughter prepared to leave, the little girl slipped behind the counter. She tugged on the owner's apron and handed him another napkin with a new drawing. This time, she had drawn herself sitting at a table with her mother, both smiling while he stood nearby holding a plate of food. She had even drawn the diner sign with little stars around it. "This is our favorite place," she said with a grin. The owner crouched down, took the napkin gently, and smiled. "Thank you. That means a lot." They left again, and the diner returned to its quiet rhythm. But this time, something felt different. The owner didn't feel weighed down by the usual stress of slow business. Instead, he felt a strange sense of purpose. He wasn't just running a diner, he was keeping hope alive for people who had nowhere else to go. That evening, as he wiped down the counter, one of his regular customers, a chatty woman who often came for coffee, mentioned seeing a short post online. "Did you know someone wrote about you?" she asked, showing her phone. The post described a kind diner owner who had fed a homeless mother and her child. Without asking for a penny, he frowned in surprise. "Who wrote that?" She shrugged. "Not sure, but people are sharing it. Look, already dozens of comments saying they want to visit here." The owner didn't know what to say. He hadn't done it for attention. He had only followed his heart. But somehow that simple act was already spreading beyond the walls of his diner. The next day, more people started walking in. Some came for breakfast, others for lunch. A few even asked directly, "Are you the man from the story?" He would laugh it off, saying he just did what anyone should. But deep down, he was touched. By the end of the week, the diner was busier than it had been in months. The seats filled, the kitchen buzzed, and the cash register finally rang more often. The owner worked harder than ever, but instead of feeling tired, he felt alive. And in the midst of the growing crowd, he sometimes spotted the mother and daughter slipping into a corner booth, smiling shyly as if they had found a little piece of home. What the owner didn't realize was that this was only the beginning. The kindness he had shown was about to ripple further than he ever imagined, bringing people into his life who would change everything. The days rolled by, and the little diner began to change in ways the owner had not seen for a long time. What had once been an empty space with silent booths now carried the buzz of chatter, the clinking of cups, and the smell of fresh food filling every corner. People were coming from nearby neighborhoods, some even from towns further away. They said they had read about the kind diner owner online and wanted to show their support. At first, the owner didn't believe it would last. He thought maybe it was just a wave of curiosity, that people would stop coming once the story faded. But each morning, new faces walked through the door, smiling warmly, ordering meals, and leaving bigger tips than usual. Some quietly slipped envelopes of cash into the jar on the counter, whispering, "For the good work you do." The owner was overwhelmed. He wasn't used to praise or attention. He had always thought of himself as just a man trying to keep a diner running. Now people treated him like a hero. It felt strange but also deeply humbling. One evening, after the lunch rush had finally settled down, the mother and her daughter returned. They slipped quietly into their favorite booth near the window. This time, they didn't look as nervous as before. The little girl bounced in her seat, waving happily when she saw the owner. He brought them food as always, and sat down with them for a few minutes. The mother leaned forward, her voice soft. "I saw the posts online," she said. "People keep talking about you. They don't know what you've done for us. You gave us more than food. You gave us hope." The owner shook his head. "I didn't do much. Anyone else would have done the same." But the mother looked at him steadily. "No, not everyone would. Many people turn away." The little girl interrupted, holding up another napkin drawing she had been working on. This one showed the diner filled with people. She had drawn herself and her mother sitting at their booth, while the owner stood at the counter with a big smile. "It's busy now, just like this," she said proudly. The owner laughed softly and ruffled her hair. He tucked the napkin into his apron pocket, where he now kept a small collection of her drawings. Each one felt like a reminder of why he was doing all this. Later that week, a local newspaper reporter came to the diner. He asked for an interview, wanting to share the story with a bigger audience. The owner was hesitant at first. He didn't like being the center of attention. But the mother encouraged him. "Let them know," she said. "Your kindness might inspire someone else." So he agreed, and the article was published with a photo of him standing proudly in front of his diner. The headline read, "Small Diner, Big Heart. How One Man's Kindness Sparked Hope in a Town." After that, the story spread even further. People started sharing it on social media again, and soon the diner was busier than it had ever been in its entire history. Families came in, groups of students stopped by after school, and even travelers passing through the town made it a point to visit. The once quiet corner diner had become a gathering place full of warmth and laughter, but it wasn't just about the business. Something deeper was happening. The diner began to feel like a community. People came not just to eat but to connect, to feel part of something good. Strangers would sit together, talk to each other, and sometimes even help one another. The kindness the owner had shown was spreading through every person who walked in. The mother noticed this too. She offered to help in the diner when it was busy cleaning tables, refilling coffee cups, or stacking plates in the kitchen. She never asked for payment. She only wanted to give back. The little girl often sat at the counter, drawing or chatting with customers. Many regulars grew fond of her, smiling whenever she handed them one of her doodles. One evening, as the owner locked up, he found himself pausing by the window. He looked inside at the booths, now filled with memories instead of silence. He thought back to that first night when the mother and daughter had walked in, shivering and unsure. Who would have guessed that such a small act, a simple bowl of soup, would lead to all this? Yet even as he smiled, he knew this was only part of the story. Something told him that more changes were on the way. The diner was no longer just a business. It had become a beacon of kindness. And when kindness shines, it often attracts people in ways you least expect. The owner didn't know it yet. But soon a stranger would walk through those doors, someone whose presence would shift everything again. The diner's journey, and his own, was far from over. The diner had never felt so alive. The booths that once sat empty were now filled with chatter every morning, afternoon, and evening. Families laughed together, workers stopped by for hot coffee, and travelers who had heard about the story came just to see the place that everyone online had been talking about. The owner moved quickly between tables, balancing plates, pouring coffee, and offering smiles that came more easily these days. The mother helped whenever she could, quietly wiping tables, sweeping the floor, or carrying dishes back to the kitchen. She never asked for anything in return, but the owner often slipped her a little food to take with her and her daughter. It became their rhythm. She gave her time, he gave what he could, and between them, a bond of trust slowly grew. The little girl was like a spark in the room. Customers adored her. She often sat at the counter, her legs swinging as she drew pictures on napkins. Sometimes she handed them out to customers, and they would smile, tuck them into their wallets, and call them treasures. Other times, she taped them to the wall of the diner, slowly turning one side of the room into a gallery of her innocent, hopeful drawings. People began to recognize her as the little artist of the diner, and it gave her a sense of belonging she had not felt in a long time. One cold afternoon, when the diner was buzzing with its usual lunch crowd, the door opened and a tall man in a sharp suit stepped inside. He looked out of place among the regular customers, with polished shoes and an expensive coat that carried no trace of snow or dirt. The chatter softened as people noticed him. He scanned the room before his eyes landed on the mother and her daughter, who were cleaning up one of the back booths. The mother froze when she saw him. Her eyes widened, and she grabbed her daughter's hand protectively. The owner noticed right away and walked over, unsure if there was trouble. But before he could ask, the man spoke in a low, emotional voice. "I've been looking for you," he said. The mother's lips trembled. "Brother?" she whispered. The diner went quiet. The man's shoulders relaxed, and he stepped closer, his eyes misting over. Yes, I've searched for months. I didn't know where you went. Why didn't you call me? Tears streamed down the mother's face as the little girl clung to her side. The man knelt down and opened his arms, and the girl hesitated before running into them. He held her tightly, relief washing over his face. The mother stood there, torn between shame and joy. I didn't want to be a burden, she whispered. I thought I could manage on my own. The man shook his head firmly. You were never a burden. You're my family. You should have come to me. The owner stood back, watching silently as the reunion unfolded. Something about it warmed him deeply. After weeks of helping them, seeing this moment felt like watching a missing piece slide into place. When they finally sat down together, the suited man turned his attention to the owner. You looked after them, didn't you? The owner shifted uncomfortably. I just gave them a warm meal. That's all. But the man shook his head. No, you gave them dignity when they had none. You gave them hope. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a card, and slid it across the table. I run a company. Money has never been an issue for me. But kindness like yours, you can't put a price on that. The owner frowned slightly, not understanding. The man leaned forward. Let me help you. Whatever your diner needs, supplies, repairs, bills paid, consider it done. It's the least I can do for what you've done for my sister and niece. The owner's first instinct was to refuse. Pride and humility rose together in his chest. I appreciate it, but I can't accept charity, he said quietly. The mother spoke then, her voice gentle but firm. Please accept. You've carried us when we had nothing. Let someone carry you now. The owner looked into her tired but hopeful eyes, then at the little girl who was hugging her uncle's arm, smiling brighter than ever. He realized this wasn't about charity. It was about balance. He had given when he could, and now life was giving back. He nodded slowly. All right, he said. If it helps them, I'll accept. The man smiled for the first time, relief crossing his face. Good, then this is just the beginning. That evening, after the diner closed, the owner sat alone at one of the booths. The napkin drawings still decorated the wall beside him, each one telling the story of a child's hope. He thought about how one simple choice to serve soup on a cold night had led to this. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt it might be brighter than he ever imagined. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the streets in silence. Inside, the diner held a warmth that went far beyond food or coffee. It was the warmth of lives changed, connections made, and the promise of something bigger still to come. Weeks passed, and the diner continued to thrive in ways the owner had never thought possible. True to his word, the suited man who turned out to be more than just wealthy, but also well-connected in the community stepped in to help. He quietly paid off the diner's overdue bills, fixed the leaky roof, and even arranged for new equipment in the kitchen. For the first time in years, the owner could cook without worrying about what might break down next. The mother began working part-time at the diner. She wasn't just cleaning tables anymore, she served customers, learned to handle the register, and eventually even helped in the kitchen. With every passing day, her confidence returned. The weight of despair she once carried began to fade, replaced by a quiet pride. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rebuilding her life. The little girl, too, changed in ways that touched everyone's heart. With her uncle's support and the stability her mother now had, she went back to school. But she still spent many afternoons at the diner, sitting at the counter with her crayons and stacks of napkins. Her drawings filled an entire wall now, and customers often asked for one to take home. Some even left donations for her school supplies. Moved by her innocence and joy, the owner often watched her from the kitchen doorway, smiling as she handed out her doodles like tiny gifts. He thought about how a child's smile had somehow transformed his entire world, The diner itself became more than a business. It grew into a community hub. People gathered there not just for meals, but for the feeling it gave them, a sense of kindness, warmth, and belonging. Strangers became friends and neighbors reconnected. Stories were shared over coffee, and laughter often echoed through the small space late into the evening. One afternoon, a local TV crew came by to film a segment. They had heard about the diner's transformation and wanted to share the story. The reporter interviewed customers who spoke about the atmosphere, the little girl's drawings, and the owner's generosity. When asked how it all began, the owner simply said, "It started with a bowl of soup on a cold night." That's all. The segment aired, and soon people from even further away began visiting. Some came out of curiosity, but many came because they were searching for something real, proof that kindness still existed in the world. The diner became a symbol of hope. One evening, as the dinner rush slowed, the owner sat with the mother and her daughter at their booth. The suited man had joined them, and together they shared a meal. The little girl leaned across the table, holding up her latest drawing. This one showed the diner surrounded by a crowd of smiling people, with the words "Home" written across the top in big letters. The owner felt his throat tighten. He realized then that the diner had become more than his dream. It had become their home, their safe place, their second chance. "Do you see this?" the mother said softly, pointing to the word the child had written. "She finally feels like she belongs somewhere. And it's because of you." The owner shook his head gently. "No, it's because of all of us. Kindness only works when it's shared. You gave back just as much as I gave you." The suited man raised his glass of water and smiled. "To second chances," he said. They clinked their glasses together, and for a moment, the small diner felt like the center of the world. As the night wore on, customers came and went, leaving behind laughter and the faint sound of conversations. The owner stood at the counter, wiping it down as he had done countless times before. But this time, he didn't feel worry or loneliness. He felt contentment. The diner, once on the edge of closing forever, was now filled with life, love, and meaning. Before closing, he walked over to the wall covered in the little girl's drawings. He touched one at random, a picture of the diner with the words "Thank you" scrawled in uneven letters. He smiled, knowing he would never take them down. They were more than drawings. They were the story of how one act of kindness had grown into something far bigger than he ever imagined. That night, as he locked the door and looked back at the glowing sign above the window, he thought about everything that had happened. He had started with nothing but a struggling diner and a heavy heart. Yet by opening his door to a tired mother and her hungry child, he had gained more than he ever thought possible. Kindness had changed their lives. And in the process, it had changed his too.